And now we have our next speaker, who's Dr. Sinead McCoole, who really doesn't need any great introduction. Should be well known to everyone here as a historian and a curator. Some of you may know of her book, Lady Lavery, and I also think one of the things she should really be recognised for is uncovering revolutionary women when there was no dictionary of Irish biography, when there was no dictionary of national biography, and doing all of that work to uncover those women, and wrote about it as well, and has made all of her work publicly available, and of course has done tremendous work also within the curatorial kind of arena as well, and one of the most important ones, I guess, with the Jackie Clark archive in Castlebar, which I went to see last year. And if you ever get a chance to go and look just at the museum itself and all the documents that are there, it's just really, really interesting from, the whole history of Ireland, really. But you can also look at the actual archives and study the archives, which I think are in the library there in the town as well. So she's done all of that, plus other things, and she's going to talk to us today on curating Mná100. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. You're probably aware that this has been in partnership with Mná100, which has ended. So today is pretty emotional because it's a closing of a door for me, and I'm absolutely honoured to have followed Nora and her work. And from the moment that I saw the lineup and saw that Cartoon Saloon was going to be in the slot, and that Maeve had decided to put me in as a creative, not as a consultant or not as a historian, I just thought, wow, because in some ways she went to the heart of, I suppose, this particular slot is probably to the heart of maybe who I am and what I had a choice to go to university or to go to art school. And I chose to go to art school because my father died. And that is the truth. I ended up on a corporation grant and I ended up at university. And the reason I'm saying this is because of what you said there about the famine. And this is the interesting thing. My father died in his 50s. He was from Donegal, and when we had two funerals, one in Limerick where I grew up and one in Donegal. And the reason that's significant, and I hope that I'm just putting this in here, that this can be edited out for the final production, is that that I saw that mountainy men came down. That was what I was described as, men whose faces were blackened from the sitting in front of the fires. And they came, and I asked who those men were, because they shook my hand, gnarled hands, and they said, "We knew your people." And I thought, I don't know my people. Who are my people? And so I decided then to go to university, because I thought, because my name is McCoole, that I would be taught how to find my way back to the past and find out I was related to Fionn McCoole, who I assumed was a real person. So when I look at those animations which draw on the Book of Kells, to the ancient goddesses, to the folklore, when you talk about famine, when you talk about it, when we think about the end of this revolutionary period, we have come to know so much of who we are. I finally have the answer of who my people are, because we chose our ancestors that we want to follow. Do we follow the RIC? Do we follow World War I? Do we follow the soldiers that went? Do we follow the politicians? Do we follow the women? Who do we follow? And so what has happened over the last 10 years is we've changed our conversations. And that's partly because, as it's gone over and over in the talks today, it's because the world's conversations have changed. The difference, I remember the beginnings of that animation story of the young people who had gone. I know that Margaret McCurtain, who taught me and influenced me, I've talked about it so many times, in the 1990s. I know about the work of Mary O'Dowd. I know about the work that Maria Luddy did in that the directory, which is now on Mná100, which has been updated and included and improved. I grew up in Limerick, so I know about the evolution of UL. And I think what we have is, it's all interconnecting lines. And so I'm going to run really quickly through the story of what Mná100 is. So Mná100 is a term that came up very late in the decade of centenaries. I was very fortunate to be being put on to the expert advisory group, one of 3 women, along with Dr. Mary Daly, former president here of the Royal Irish Academy, and Leanne Lane, Dr. Leanne Lane, who started working with Maria Luddy on the women's documents all those years ago in the 1990s. And so what is the future? Where do we go from here? Well, we're only as good as the people that we have populating, and I was the one who clapped straight away when I heard when Jane spoke about the first money that she spent on archives. It's as simple as that. It's about the person who takes that decision that leads to the next person and the next person and the next person. So when we think back on the decade of centenaries and we think back to the beginning, we always think from 2016. The first number of years, women really weren't featuring in the same way until Mary McAuliffe and the Women's History Association put together their conference on Mná100, and that was really the sort of the start of it, but it didn't really come into the mainstream then. That conference then led to a documentary, and there was so much conversation around. But this is in 2016 when there was a Women's Day, a celebration, and I remember you can actually get the zeitgeist or the feeling or the sense of you've done something when family members of all those women came and the women of the army marched, and they saw women sort of representing the state. And then it was the first time a woman from the army read the proclamation, and those books that they have there that they produced. We went in the beginning where it was almost like we were at pamphlet level. Now we've ended up with books that are bound, and they have their limited edition, beautiful productions that have come out of the decade of centenary as we've gone and gained more confidence, and there wasn't the difficulty around the commemoration that perhaps was anticipated. But those booklets were the ones that were hardest to get. They're like hen's teeth, those booklets. And so I have 2. And I have 2 children. I'm hoping that the collection won't be keeping in mind what we have today. But the idea being is how do you tell something that a booklet is valuable? How do you say that these are rare now pieces? Because that's what happens with women's history. It's in the small things. Women are the collectors by and large, but not for others, but maybe sometimes not for themselves. And as I said to you today, it's sort of emotional in the sense that it seems to me like an ending. I've been asked to address the issue that's in our house, which is boxes and boxes and boxes. And the issue that I have to do is to cull some of that material. And you find it very difficult when you move from something into something else not to maintain your own archive, because you never quite are sure what it is. And so I ended up and we talk about the creative piece. I traveled a lot on the train and, back and forth on buses. And I remember feeling that we were having all the one conversation, particularly in 2016, and this institution produced this book. But this book became more than a book when the artists got into it and they put it on a bus. I ended up sitting in on a meeting, and I said, wouldn't it be great if you put something on a train, because they were putting it on everything. They had got into trouble at one stage for putting it on the jersey, I think, of one of the players, the soccer players, and that was a breach of something. But it was on everything. I was chased down the street by a guy because I was wearing the official jacket, again, a collector's item. There was only 10 of them, Teen 2016. I wore it for a long time until I put it into a box and thought it was, again, the value of it all. And I was chased down the road with my logo on the back of my green jacket, and he said to me, would you like a phone cover to go with your jacket? And I said, no thanks, I'm grand. Well, I regret that now. I should have had the matching thing, because when you knew the conversation had gone beyond the academic realm is when the people have it. And this bus went around, and you sat on a bus, and I don't know if anyone else went cross-country express way during that time, but you could travel on the bus. You could travel either. Well, this particular day, I travelled with Mary Paroles. What happened is, if you sit in the front seat of the bus, it was in a little, like a small area there. And so I would just regale the person next to me and said to them, do you know, have you ever heard of Mary Perolles? And your woman says, I don't think that's how you pronounce that, P-E-R-O-L-Z. And I said, oh, no, it is. So we don't let on who you are at all in these situations. But Mary Perolles, anyway, I ended up telling her the great witness statement, if all of you know here, because you're all the converted, is that it's brilliant. But when I saw the people dressing up, so we became like the American reenactors, but usually it was the good-looking ones that looked great in the uniform that were the ones who ended up on the telly or on the pictures. And so I had a great joy there the other day of being in the Houses of the Oireachtas, and guess what? My great-grandmother is in the Houses of the Oireachtas on the wall as one of the women, because I supplied a photograph of the family to the Kathleen Lynn. I couldn't believe it. It's actually now there on the walls of the Houses of the Oireachtas. But when we did the exhibition, and I was in there as the historical advisor, they made it political. In the same way we talked about today, where I was listening to Diane, and Diane will remember that in the 90s, myself and herself spoke at the Women's History Conference as young students. Margaret McCurtain had brought her from the north, talking about political women, and I was talking about Lady Lavery. And my supervisor said, as people may know, I've told this story before, is that I was told that I was writing about somebody who had made sandwiches for politicians. And you'll remember that that comes directly from Scratch Saturday about Mary Robinson. Get down off the roof there and make some sandwiches. And if you remember that line at the time. So the thing with it is they used Kathleen Lynn to bring up those questions, and I think she would have approved. And so what I really loved, and again, missed opportunity, we're talking today about archives, we're talking about creativity. I really, really wanted to do this, and it slipped by, and now it's 5, 6, 7 years ago. I wanted to purchase one of these students' dresses, and what they are the most incredible set of dresses that are inspired by the stories. So each of the women had a dress, and each of them had a depiction and a story behind it. And this is what happens when you hand over the history and democratize it, really. And that was in Cleary's windows. Uniformity, it was called. And I would urge you to look at that thing, if you can find it, even on the web now. I got these photographs pretty early on. Oh, that was... So there, we know where we began, as everybody said, Dublin's fighting story told by the men who made it. And in Dublin's fighting story, there is an article called How the Women Helped. So I found myself quite by chance in the middle of something. I came to the 2016 project office because they needed a historical advisor. And when somebody asks you, should you recommend somebody for a job, and it's your dream job, what do? You move heaven and earth and you say, I want to do that job. So I ended up, and they were looking for an exhibition to put on for 2016. It was in the little booklet that they produced. And so the thing with it was, I said to them one day at a meeting, is that book notional or is it actual something you need to put together for the commemoration? And this now months we're going, and they said, it's actual. And I said, you do realize how long it takes to put an exhibition together? And I said, I don't think you've enough time to put an exhibition together that's a national exhibition. You can put together a small pull-up with your banners, but you can't do something that is worthy of the women's story. So what happens in those situations? You get the job. And so, because we'd now had the release of the papers from the Military Bureau and from the military archives, sure, we were finding this material was writing itself. And so one of the things we talked about in the expert advisory group was, how do you make the Rising All Ireland? Well, the answer to that as a historian is, you can't, it's not. But if you talk to a creative, and I'm talking as a creative today, you go, oh, no problem, that's fine, I'll get on with it. And so that is an exhibition that covers an All Ireland. And I remember on the night in question, when we opened it in Dublin Castle, what happened with the officials, as much as anyone who had turned up there, was everybody in Ireland goes to their county, and they see who you've picked. And you could see people crisscrossing through the room, going county to county. And then they decided that it was going to be all Ireland. It was going to travel. It was the only time that I'd ever turned up at something without having been there to set it up. And I walked in and somebody else had set it up and I couldn't believe it. And the amount of work that went into this commemoration by the people who can't and are not named because that's their job and they're officials. That's what is important to remember. There are hundreds of people who made this commemoration possible. I'm a front person for that, and I've been privileged to talk about it, but I couldn't, it's not any of my work alone, it's a network of people. And so we changed that conversation. The photographs came from families, it was incredible. We got, but I wanted to put this up because the local museums network started off and they had one item which had come from the De Valera's papers, which is the Countess's arrest warrant at the time. And then it grew and grew and grew, and by the time it was finished, the local authority network, the Decade of Centenaries coordinators, had pulled hundreds of stories out, and so many people were involved and affected. And so that's Wexford, and this is Sligo. And so one of the things I loved most about it was bringing and being involved with artists. And when Rita Duffy did her souvenir shop, although I was slightly disapproving as a historian of the storytelling, as a creative, I applauded her. Imagine we were able to do make your own Markovich. So I like this so much that the tea towels that you can see here were given out at an event, and I wanted to get a tea towel because I hadn't bought it the time around, and I organised the event and she had a ream of tea towels. Guess who left without a tea towel? Me. So imagine, so a celebration of Countess Markovich. This is in the week before the pandemic, and what was amazing about that was, if you know your history, we knew enough about Markovich, we'd explored her. Margaret Ward had written that amazing article on her as a Minister of Labour, establishing her as a minister, so we were able to poke fun at her because we understood her. We knew that you could either make your revolutionary Markovich or you could make your Anglo-Irish Markovich, and that's a whole lecture in itself, describing the Anglo-Irish Markovich, which is still really, truly to be explored. And then imagine you get the opportunity to do something you've always wanted to do, and I made a pop-up museum for the commemoration of the centenary of women, Votes for Women. And that was because I was in the right place with the right person and the right people, but not just the right people in government, but also we also had a female minister in Heather Humphreys who was so supportive of the commemoration, and also against the backdrop of Waking the Feminists. It's always in the context, you know, of it. And so this is the exhibition in the marvellous Coach House in Dublin Castle. And when we ask about a history, I took the history book, as some people may know, and I rewrote it from the perspective of women. And when you look at material, you have to look at what's important. I learned very early on when I did Guns and Chiffon, when I lay the wedding veil of Countess Markovich, which I found in a private house that was on loan to Kilmainham Jail for that exhibition, and put it in juxtaposition to her gun, that I was being an art historian, looking at this, putting nice objects together, but not thinking about the undercurrent of what that meant. And when I discovered that was when a group came from the north, including Bernadette McAlliskey, and I popped up, hair flying, to get the kudos of being the curator of Guns and Chiffon. And I discovered that it actually happened to me, never happened to me since, I hit a wall of air. Because when I went to go to the door to meet the people to say, do you like the exhibition? I realized that I could not hear a sound. There were 45 people in those two rooms, and all I could hear was crying. And I took myself off, and I turned around and I walked away, because I said that had nothing to do with me. This was the material speaking to them, and I just was a facilitator, but I learned the lesson. And that is, you have to underpin your work with a history. As I heard Nora say, you have to understand where you're coming from. It might be a line on a page, or it might be something. Never be throwaway. Our authenticity, the truth as best as we know it, is really important. So the combination of being a historian and a curator, and my background, and again, I did history of art, but this image here is a nun's abbot from Knock Museum, alongside the Veritas collection of booklets, because I looked for what was the best-selling books of the 1960s and discovered it wasn't a novel. it was booklets about how to be a nun and should my daughter be a nun. They were the best-selling books of that particular time relating to women. And so we were lucky and fortunate to have the support of so many important women. And Chief Justice Denham gave her robes that were in 2012, and we followed it through from women getting the vote. And so Paula Desmond lent, I said to her, do you have anything that belongs to your mother in terms of physical, costumes or tangible history and that? And she ended up sending up E.B. Jorgensen. It was the outfit that her mother wore for the medical dinner. And when I saw it, I opened the bag and I went, oh, God. The 80s. It even looked and felt and everything. It brought me back in a moment. But putting it in a case and dressing it, putting it on a stand, it transformed. But it for Eileen Desmond, if you know her story, she actually had come from, her father was a postman who lost his sight. They lived in a council cottage. And when she went and was the third minister and the highest ranking minister that there was, is Minister for Health and Social Welfare, she wore a brach and a tweed skirt. She wore our traditional costume, even though it was designed by a designer. And that's gone back to that family's collection. It's not gone to a national cultural institution. That exhibition has been broken up. We didn't do a catalogue. So I'm saying to you that it's gone. That work is over. That work is finished. And so this is online now. And for the next 5 years, they're preserving Mná100, including, and hopefully not me, the piece that we're doing today. I'm going to have to use every pull now to get some of this edited. But the idea here is women 100 years in public life. I had the privilege of working with the cabinet ministers to write their stories, and they don't see themselves as in the context. So we use the Dictionary of Irish Biography as a guide, as them to write their stories as stateswomen in terms of the importance of that. And so we got the historic cabinet table because it was actually out of Leinster House because the Leinster House was being renovated, and I was waiting to see what was going to happen in terms of the election, but we only had enough women to sit around the table at that time. And what it was done, a little bit like what I would assume they do in Cartoon Saloon, is that it was a destination. And so the destination through the history of that 100 years was to the cabinet table. It sounds really obvious. At the same time, there was another book but nobody had written up. The cabinet ministers and myself and the political correspondent, whose name eludes me at the moment, were working at the same thing at the same moment. So then, because of the pandemic, and only because of the pandemic, we went online and we were able to make a virtual tour with a mobile phone and PowerPoint during the first lockdown, and it worked really well. And the girl I worked with, Maggie Mulhare, told me that it had to be broken up into segments because most people wouldn't be able to take in the whole of the 100 years, and so she was responsible for making it more, digestible. And so you work with incredible people, and then we've made films, and we have continued to make podcasts. Believe it or not, that podcast has been listened to in 43 countries. We've talked, and I've had the joy of talking to the most incredible women who lead and head our national cultural institutions. I've talked to songwriters, Gemma Dunleavy there, and John Spillane, who wrote on Mary McSweeney. Talked to the Marcus Award winners. Looked at things like Markovitch's artwork when she was in the Ukraine. It coincided with what was happening politically, and then worked with children in the making of posters, and that was just so interesting. They're such bright and interested. And then what changed? It changed because of you, because of the descendants of those women who shared their family stories. This is Sorcha McMahon, the wonderful Sorcha McMahon, and the equally wonderful Helen McMahon, who was so generous in sharing the collection she had been entrusted to. And we did difficult things as well as easy things. And this was on the day of Ballycd. I spoke to the descendants of all the principal families, and it is a robust discussion. And then continued on in the schools, and most recently Mayo produced a a really important piece based on the work on the military archives, and it's incredible. And we also looked at what would you put in a women's museum, and we know that that's been discussed now, which is fantastic. And so many people and so many institutions, including this one, did incredible things. But it was a joy to work on, and as I said, I suppose Curating Mná100, it's finished, and it was a lovely ending. And thank you so much to everybody for having me. Thank you. Bye bye.